One.
Good morning. My name is Sean Nicholas, and I'm here welcoming you to this special press briefing as we look at the whole issue of the Register for Elections, which is scheduled to be published today, the 13th of January. We in the United Progressive Party, we have had issues in the calculations used in arriving at today's date, the 13th of January. And we have since advised the supervisor of the elections by way of letter of our concerns. To elucidate on this matter further, I am flanked by two attorneys who will draw attention to the issues at hand and to give us further insight as to what we're all talking about. First, I want to say good morning to Mr. Charlesworth Tabor, who is on my right, and Mr. Chaku Simister, who is on my left. Mr. Tabor, I'll start off with you. At work here is the Representation of the People Act. Perhaps you can outline the legislation for us to put it all in context.
Absolutely. And before going to the legislation, I'd just like to underscore the point that a fundamental principle of any democratic society is the rule of law. And what that principle implies, that every person, every individual in a society, and every organization must follow the law.
Okay, so specifically now we're talking about the calculation of 14 days after the writ that the list should be published. What is the issue at hand at this time?
Well, the issue at hand is that initially the Commission had 7 days in which to publish the list after a writ of election was issued. This was amended. The Representation of the People Act was amended number 6 of 2010 to change that requirement from 7 to 14 days. What we have here is a letter from the attorney for the Commission, the Electoral Commission, which stated that the list of electors should be published on the 13th of January, which is today. We have contended that that is incorrect because the list really, 14 days from when the writ was issued by the Governor General, when you compute 14 days from the 20th of December, it brings you to the 9th of January. So the list really should have been published on Monday. I think the attorney for the Electoral Commission fell into error. Even though she quoted section 44.4 of the Interpretation Act, which says, and I will read, where the time limited by an enactment for the doing of anything expires or falls upon a Sunday or public holiday, the time extends to, and the thing may be done on the first day that is not a Sunday or public holiday. The error that the attorney fell into, that she added the 3 days, public holidays that we had, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and the 27th of December, which was given on as a holiday. And then there's also New Year's Day and the 2nd of Monday. So counting from the 20th of December and excluding those days, the 14 days would fall on the 8th of January. And what the law says is that the following day, once it's not a Sunday or holiday, would be the day that that counts. So what the lawyer did is to add 5 days, the 3 holidays, the 5 holidays that I mentioned earlier, Christmas Day, the 25th of December, the 26th of December, the 27th of December, which was a holiday, New Year's Day, and Monday the 2nd of January, which was also a holiday. So she added those 5 days from the 9th, which takes it to the 13th, and that is absolutely incorrect. So the list should have been published on the 9th of January and not the 13th.
Chaku?
Okay, thank you. What we are really seeing is a non-compliance with the law. And let us put it in context, as Brother Tabor had pointed out. The attorney applied the correct section of the Interpretation Act, but in calculating the days is where there was error. Now, I had a discussion with the attorney on the 11th, and we went through the act and the calendar similar to what Brother Tabor did. And we both concluded that the list should have been published on the 9th. I was further advised that the attorney would have informed the supervisor of elections of the error in naming the 13th as the date for publication. But we went further. Our party, through our General Secretary, wrote to the supervisor of elections, indicating to the supervisor the error that has been made, and asked that they publish the list without delay. It was already delayed. We asked it published without delay because the calculation is so easy. The supervisor of elections wrote back to the party and indicated that she was going to publish the list on the 13th. She further stated in her letter that Saturday is not a working day, so she was excluding Saturdays from the count. Now, this is not just clear error on the part of the supervisor of election. This was a blatant and deliberate act of the supervisor not to comply with the law. And why do we say that? Because in their attorney's missive to the supervisor dated the 20th of December, the attorney indicated that Saturdays must be included in calculating the days. However, the supervisor in her letter to the party indicates that Saturday is not a working day, so she ostensibly is going to exclude Saturday from the count. Now, why is this so important? It is important because the supervisor of election, being created by the Constitution, has a constitutional duty to carry out her functions in a fair and impartial manner. And the fact that the Representation of the People Amendment Act of 2003 provided for legal counsel to ABEC, and by extension the supervisor of election, clearly it is implied that legal counsel's advice should be taken on board. But here the supervisor of election, not following the dictate of Cap 242, Section 44(4), I think, she's not following that. She's not following the dictate of her own legal counsel that indicated that she must include Saturdays in the count. She said, oh no, then whose directives is she following? And why is this so important? Because we know that subsequent to the 9th of January, that compilation or adding to list was still taking place. And so if the list under the law should be published by the 9th of January 2023, and additions are being made to the list subsequent to January 9th, 2023, there must be concern because there is clear non-compliance with the law. She has the duty to follow the law, not what she thinks should happen, but what the law says should happen.
I want us to step back a little bit, because persons might ask, why is this such an issue at a time like this? I want you to go back to talk a bit about when the register for election is published in relation to the twice yearly publication of the voters list, and the timing at this end of the time so close to the general elections. Perhaps we should go back there.
Okay. Our law requires that a register of electors be published on the 30th of June and the 31st of December of each year.
That's correct.
This year, the elections were called. The writs were issued on the 20th of December. So the Electoral Commission would have already well been in tow of publishing the December 31st list. They publish it on the 23rd of December. We have no issue with that. Now, the writ has been issued. What the writ is saying to the supervisor of elections and the Electoral Commission, put the register for elections together. That is the list, let's call it the list, that the people will vote on. Okay. And the 14 days is significant because if the supervisor of election did follow the law and publish the list on the 9th of January, it means that all concerned would have 9 days, or at least 8 days, to ensure that their name on the list. Political parties would have the time to comb that list properly. Now, with publishing the list almost on the eve of the elections, it reduces that time to 4 days. A time that is wholly inadequate for parties and other persons concerned to comb the list. See, the law, as Brother Tabor pointed out, had given 7 days. And it was believed that with the growth of the list, that 14 days would be a more adequate time. And in this instance, luckily, there were a number of holidays that were not included. But for the holidays, the list would have had to be published on the 3rd of January. And you see, you'll have quite about 2 full weeks to go through the list. So it was important that the list be published in compliance with the law. Not when the UPP wants it to be published. Not when the other political parties want it to be published. Not when the supervisor of election wants it to be published. But when it is to be published according to the law, it should be published. And let us be reasonable here. On one hand, the supervisor of election is looking at her counsel's letter and said, counsel told me the 13th. So I'm going for the 13th. At the same time, she looks at the same letter that says, in counting, we must include Saturdays. But she said, I'm not including Saturdays. Can't have it both ways. But the most important thing is that the electorate should have the opportunity to have adequate time to ensure that their names are on the register for elections. We are calling on the supervisor of elections again. Today is the 13th. The list should have already been published first thing this morning. And what is more egregious is that we have information that the list, except for Barbuda, all 16 lists in Antigua, have been printed. And they're just waiting to publish. Publish is distributing them. So why is the supervisor of election reducing the time that the people would have to review the register for elections? And that is a question that I think the supervisor should be called upon. We're also taking this opportunity, Sister Sean, if I may,
Sure.
to call on ABEC to ensure that every counting center has a backup generator in the event electricity goes out inadvertently or advertently. So again, we're asking, the resources are there. If the government doesn't have, there are private persons who have generators. Every counting center should be equipped with an alternative source of energy in the event the electricity goes off, so the smooth counting of the votes can go on. Thank you, Sean.
I see some questions are coming in via Facebook.
Well,
Yes.
Before the questions,
Yes. No, I wasn't going there yet.
No,
but
no,
go
I
ahead.
would just like to
Yes.
add as an aside to what Brother Chaku has said. I see that the attorney for ABEC went to the Interpretation Act section 44, subsection 4, but she really did not have to do that because an amendment number 11 of 2002, section 2.1, says the same thing that the Interpretation Act says. So she should have been guided by the act that governs ABEC. So she did not have to resort to the Interpretation Act because it's clear, it's in the law, it's in the Representation of the People's Act, how the time should be computed.
Okay. I wanted to follow up on what Chaku was saying, but the law did say or said that no later than. Why then are we, or ABEC is choosing to go to the outer boundary of the date? Because no later than can be 6 days, it can be 10 days, it could be 12 days.
That is correct.
So they have taken it to the outer limit. And the question I want to put to you, Tabor, is what implication would this have on the electorate, this late publication?
Well, as Brother Chaku said earlier, I don't know how it's going to affect a free and fair election. And I was doing some research this morning to see if a challenge can be lodged after the election, challenging what has happened.
Yes.
So I'm presently looking at that to see, based on the outcome of the election and what has happened with the publication of the list, if a challenge can be mounted.
I would add,
Sure.
I would add that the late publication of the list on the surface directly may not affect a free and fair election. However, if because of the late publication that the period was inadequate for proper combing, using the term
Yes.
combing of the list, then there could be a concern. There could be another concern, as I pointed out earlier, that if the list by law should have been published on the 9th of January 2023, the law is saying after the 9th of January 2023, that's it,
Right.
Madam Supervisor, with the list.
Because the list, the register of voters becomes the list for
For
elections.
elections,
Right.
So there should not be any difference between both.
Except maybe a
Except,
slight
yes,
difference
correct.
for
those who
the
came,
objection period.
right.
Just a slight difference. But the important thing is if they have, as we have been informed, as I said, about 3 days ago, a candidate received a message from the candidate's returning officer saying, you can have transfers complete up to now. And that is after the date that the list should have been published. But the important thing that I think I would want everyone to take away from this is that the supervisor of election has the legal obligation to obey the law.
Absolutely.
She cannot, look, when your lawyer is telling you, in calculating this, you must count Saturdays. And the supervisor is saying, I'm not counting on Saturday because I want to work on Saturday. Unacceptable. We are calling for compliance with the law, because where we see lax compliance in one area, we may see greater non-compliance in other areas. And it would be remiss for me not to point out that it is the non-compliance with the law, one of the reasons that we had the crisis in 2009. And to drive home that point, the law had pointed out that the register for elections is the identical register that must show up on election day. And what the supervisor and others at the Electoral Commission decided to do was to step outside of what the law says should happen with the printing of the list, and resulted in great delay and confusion. All we're asking, as we ask our citizens to obey the law, otherwise there are consequences, irrespective of your position, you too have an obligation to obey the law. And that's all we're asking the supervisor of election to do. Obey the law between now and the 18th of January, when the people of Antigua and Barbuda expect to exercise their right to vote and must be confident that the supervisor of election, who is constitutionally in charge of that process, complies with the law, and so that we see the election is free and fair.
Okay, we're going to take our first question from Facebook, and the question is, can we not petition the court to instruct ABEC to follow the letter of the law?
Certainly.
Yes, we can instruct the court to ask ABEC to follow the law. There's a principle in law, a judicial review, that all public officials' decisions can be questioned. In this case, we can file a claim for judicial review to have the court review the decision of ABEC, and in particular, the supervisor of elections. And if the court finds that that decision was incorrect, the court can issue a number of reliefs. One of them is mandamus to instruct ABEC to do certain things. But in this case, it would be too late for ABEC to really publish the list at the required time. But that is open, yes. Challenges can be filed in the court with respect to what has happened.
And I think the next question links with that first question. They're asking, what is the next step the party will take, seeing that the list was to be published on the 9th and not today? Chaku?
At this time, we are ready and eager to contest the election irrespective of adversities. And as Brother Table pointed out, if we were to go to court today and make an application for leave to seek judicial review, even if the court were to say, all right, what we would have to ask for then is an injunction to stop the election. And we're not in that.
Right.
We're not in that. We're ready. I strongly believe, though, that we may still need a declaration subsequent to the election so that this doesn't happen again.
Okay,
absolutely.
Sure.
I agree with that totally, Chaku. So we would seek a declaration so that ABEC would know the law going forward.
Okay, as we await the next question, okay, here we go. Okay, I'm not seeing. Does the late publication of the list could facilitate names? Okay, the late publication, I guess what they're asking, if names can be facilitated after the fact. I think that's the question that the person is trying to ask.
Well, our concern that the list should have been published on the 9th. The 9th is the legal cutoff date for the publication of the list. Nothing else should be done regarding the list but it being published. That is, put in the public domain so it can be scrutinized.
Yep.
So if the Electoral Commission were still tinkling with that list after the 9th, and we can find a direct correlation with the results of any of the seats contested that can be tied to the tinkling of the list after the 9th, I think we'll have a credible claim.
Challenge, yes.
Okay. So today being the 13th, we await to hear that the list has been published.
Correct.
Up to the time of getting here, I was not aware. So if it is, since we're on, we will see what happens. But I want for you at this point to, as much as we are directing our concern to ABEC, every elector has a responsibility to make sure his or her name, once they're duly registered, that their name is on the list. I would love for you to make that pitch at this time and the importance of doing so.
Yes, it's absolutely important that every elector scrutinizes the list to make sure that their name is on the list. I did that yesterday to make sure I am registered in Rural North, and I also look for names of people that I know, and their names are on the list. But it's a very important exercise for everyone to now look at the list to ensure that their name is there.
So do not wait on someone to tell you that your name.
No, absolutely,
Go.
absolutely not.
And for
Absolutely.
clarity, Brother Tabor, the list that you look at yesterday is the December 23rd
Correct.
list,
Yes.
not the list we're talking about.
Today, yes.
Right, that is true.
But
so,
I don't think my name would have come off between
well,
then
you
and
never
now
know.
anyway.
You never know.
But I
So
look- I
when
look
it comes out, we all have a personal responsibility.
look, yeah.
You know where you're registered, to make sure that your name is on the list, so that you know that you are duly registered
Right,
there. Yes.
because you see, you could see your name on the
December.
list that came out December 23rd, but that is not the most important list now. It is the register for elections, because that is the register that will be in the respective polling stations, so you have to make sure your name is on the list that should have been published the 9th, but they tell us will come out today.
And in the case that your name is not on the list, what happens? What recourse does that individual
Well,
have?
you have your voter ID card, you head up to the electoral office. I would strongly suggest also that the constituency in which you live, you call the UPP candidate for that constituency and said, here I have a problem, call a member of your legal team to assist me resolving this. Now, once you have a voter registration identification card, your name should be on that list.
And that is very important, because I have a personal situation. We have a client who came in from London last week. She's registered in All Saints East and St. Luke's. I visited her at her home. She showed me her voter ID, and I went through the list, and her name is not there. Yeah, so it's something I will have to follow up with her today when the list is published, the final list.
And where there is one, there are more than one.
Yeah, to make sure that her name is on the list for elections.
Okay. Someone is asking about an injunction, whether or not the party would want to do an injunction, but I think you said no?
No.
No, not
Time
at this
doesn't
time.
prep it, really,
Right. Okay, so...
And most important though, the question that whether the injunction could be filed so they had to revert to the December 31st list, our party don't want anyone to be disenfranchised. We just want the law to be followed.
Absolutely.
And once the law is being followed, there will be no disenfranchisement.
Okay, so as we seek to wrap this up, what's the final message that you have for our listeners and our viewers as it pertains to the register for elections?
The register should come out today. Make sure your name is on that register. If your name is not on the register, call the UPP candidate in your constituency and you will be assisted immediately, if not sooner. But we also ask that you be vigilant Because if we're seeing a case as this, where there's non-compliance with the law, we must be vigilant, have our ears, eyes open, our voter ID card ready, and our voting finger to dip into that ink on January 18th, 2023.
Table?
Well, I endorse everything that Brother Chaku has said, and I would advise every registered voter to scrutinize that list today to ensure that their name is on the list for elections. And if it's not there, then you go straight to ABEC to find out what is the situation.
Okay. Well, Brother Chaku Simister, Brother Charlesworth Tabor, thank you very much for the time. And to you, our audience, those of you listening via Progressive Radio, and also those who joined us on Facebook, we thank you for taking the time out, being part of this press briefing this morning as we bring to the fore some of the issues that we are concerned with within the UPP. On behalf of my panelists, I'm Sean Nicholas, wishing you a very good day.